And we're back on a Sunday, very early morning in our basement gym, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday mornings here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, we have another big time movie anniversary today. A classic film from the greatest decade Hollywood ever had. That would be your 1990s. A film that also proved to be something of a departure for its terrific filmmaker, not so much of a departure for its star, but the kind of movie that harkens back to the other greatest decade Hollywood ever had. That would be the 1970s, where you had big stars playing morally ambiguous, sometimes heel characters while still being the central figure. On this day, 1996, Ron Howard's Ransom opened in theaters. Now, a concept that if you follow the podcast, if you've listened to certain episodes, a concept you know that I kind of subscribe to. It's not like a controversial type of thing, but it's the idea that there are certain moments in the career of a major player where they're operating at such a high frequency that so many different things are going right for them that people who maybe only know them in their older era, like for example, you see Clint Eastwood now, 95, he's cute, wow, the guy is still working, it's incredible. But people who just know him, that's that old dude, you sometimes see on TV, you see reels with him on TikTok, with de-aging and all this kind of weird AI shit. But then you say, well, wait a minute, there was a time in this guy's early 60s where he won an Oscar. Then he appeared in literally one of the greatest suspense films ever made. Then he made another incredible film with a fellow Oscar winner in Kevin Costner. Then he made one of the greatest cinematic romances of all time. Then he did a phenomenal literary adaptation where the movie is arguably better than the book. You say to yourself, how does this happen? Well, on this day, 1996, the release of Ransom saw Mel Gibson, who I know he's very controversial and polarizing. I'm not here to cast aspersions. I'm not going to make judgment on Mel Gibson outside of the movie business insofar as what films, like, for example, his performance in this film, which I think is terrific. You can certainly draw parallels to when troubled people in real life play very troubled characters. Doesn't always follow. Sometimes you have people who are, Tom Hanks playing dastardly characters that he has occasionally. He doesn't really do it that much. But the fact, for example, Tom Hanks was not offered the role of Lester Burnham in American Beauty, which ended up going to Kevin Spacey. But Hanks later said, I wish that they had at least given me the right of first refusal at that moment because maybe I would have taken that role. And that would have been one hell of a departure for Tom Cruise. But Mel Gibson, there are certain things that pop up in many of his movies. There are certain concepts that he very clearly, it's something that is part of how he sees himself, or at least at the time, how he saw himself and how he saw the world. For example, I would say by percentage, Mel Gibson characters are tortured more than any other actor that I can think of. It's not even close. You can find moments, Arnold Schwarzenegger gets beat up in True Lies, he kind of gets beat on in Eraser, but that's not a thing in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. It's not a thing in a Clint Eastwood movie. It's not really a thing in a Kurt Russell movie. But Mel Gibson, there are a lot of films where his characters, metaphorically speaking, get crucified. And then he made Passion of the Christ. Like, these things are not accidental. It doesn't mean you're always going to make a movie where that happens. But there are certain people that express themselves differently. We know this, and that goes for anything. It doesn't just have to be the movie business. But there are certain kinds of stories that Mel Gibson might respond to that another big actor from the era, whether it's Costner, whether it's Cruise, this is not for me. Maybe Mel says, well, this is for me. But Ransom came out at a time where Mel had just won Best Picture and Best Director for for Braveheart. And that ironically marked the third time in 6 years that the Best Director Oscar and ultimately Best Picture went to somebody who never attended film school, which is a little bit of a weird way of looking at it, but there is something to be said for being able to do it without being taught in an academic setting, because how much of invention has been done across time by people who weren't specifically trained in this area, just somehow knew how to do it. So I mentioned Clint Eastwood, a movie that he made after the success of Unforgiven and the suspense thriller that I teased, which of course, In the Line of Fire, dollar for dollar, the biggest box office hit, certainly in Clint's career where he was just an actor. But Kevin Costner starred with Clint in Clint's movie, A Perfect World, which is just phenomenal. I think it's the best performance Costner ever gave in a movie. But Costner won Best Picture and Best Director for 1990's Dances with Wolves. And I understand it should have been Martin Scorsese and Goodfellas. I love Costner, but there's no way that Goodfellas doesn't take those awards. There's just no way, but that's what happened. Costner wins Picture and Director for films released in 1990. Clint wins Picture and Director for films released in 1992. And Mel wins Picture and Director for films released in 95. Now, Braveheart was a very controversial pick for Best Picture because there were certain people who just didn't like the movie. Part of it was the graphic violence, the brutality, and the repeated scenes of torture. And it's not always Mel's character of William Wallace getting tortured. But 95, as I've argued, and you could go on social media and Bill Simmons, who I loved when he was just a sports guy, talking about, the Red Sox and the Yankees and the incredible rivalry. But Bill Simmons has mentioned how he thinks 95 had some, by percentage, it may have had the most fun, repeatable Generation X standard type movies, but it's not that good of a movie year. And that's how Braveheart was able to win Best Picture. There's no other year in the 90s that Braveheart is getting anywhere close to winning a Best Picture Oscar. Again, you start calculating. If Mel somehow gets Braveheart completed and released before the end of 1994, and it's shooting it out with Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, and Forrest Gump, I don't think that, maybe it gets a Best Picture nomination, but it's not coming close. But 95, the other movies of that caliber and the kind of literary-minded and quality, you're talking about Oliver Stone's Nixon, it's okay. Mike Figgis, Leaving Las Vegas, good movie, but I don't think it's that, it's good. That's not an Oscar winner for Best Picture kind of movie, I don't think. Best movie of 95 was Apollo 13, directed by Ron Howard, who directed the movie Ransom. So it took me almost 8 minutes to get to the point where the two guys who made, to me, the best films of the previous year worked together in a movie released 29 years ago today. The film is not a departure from Mel, is what I'm saying. That he's playing a gray area, morally ambiguous, maybe not even conflicted, a guy who it's my way or the highway. I'm willing to talk, but I'm going to end up doing what I want to do. You're not going to tell me what to do. And it is a true thing to say from, again, a broader sense. There's a certain kind of self-made individual. And bear in mind, no one is truly self-made, okay? My grandfather, people always said he was self-made because humble beginnings, and he ended up becoming an owner of 2 businesses, and yeah, he was brilliant, and he was self-made. Yeah, but he also said there were dozens of people, he couldn't have done it at various points, and certain people hadn't vouched for him. So it's not literally self-made. But Mel Gibson in the movie Ransom, as Tom Mullen, he plays a guy who is pretty close to a self-made multimillionaire who, if we forget the events of the story, if his life were to continue on a normal track where he is not, where the events of the story don't take place, where he's just an airplane industry mogul, he's going to be a billionaire. This is a Richard Branson kind of guy. He's on his way to doing that, where he's very intelligent, he has good people skills, and he had an angle in the business where he was able to just start making airplanes and making a shit ton of money. He doesn't like people telling him what to do, especially if he thinks, I don't believe what they're telling me is accurate. I think they're giving me a line of bullshit. Fuck you. We're going to do this my way. It's not even my way or the highway. We're going to do this my way. So Ransom was a bit of a departure for Ron Howard. He did the movie The Paper, which a lot of people thought was going to be a big hit in 94 with Michael Keaton, and that wasn't really that, it wasn't that big of a hit. But Apollo 13, to me, right now, Ron Howard won the hardware for A Beautiful Mind, 2001. Apollo 13 is the best movie he ever made, and I would argue that Cocoon is his second best movie. But Ron Howard, at this point, made movies. The general idea was that he wasn't trying to necessarily reinvent the wheel. He was just trying to tell really great, compelling stories, sometimes with, at the time, top-of-the-line special effects such as Cocoon. But he didn't seem to be interested in morally gray type stories. And it is something to be said that as people get older, their process changed. The irony is, as Clint Eastwood got older, he began telling more ambiguous stories from the other angle, where you wonder, what the hell is the filmmaker even telling us here? Because Eastwood had an evolution, and at a certain point, he was no longer interested in just bad guys doing bad shit, but we root for them because they're not as bad as everyone else, such as High Plains Drifter. So the movie Ransom, which also has a pretty spectacular all-star cast. You have Gary Sinise, fresh off of Apollo 13, and of course Forrest Gump the previous year. And you have Mel as Tom Mullen and Rene Russo working again with Mel after the success of Lethal Weapon 3, where she played the kind of female version of Mel Gibson's Martin Riggs. And you have always great Delroy Lindo as an FBI agent. And Delroy had the previous year just done Get Shorty with John Travolta, which I've argued, that's John Travolta's best performance. Inexplicably, no Oscar nomination. He should have won, let alone get an Oscar nomination. Again, I like Nicolas Cage in Leaving Las Vegas, but I don't get it. I don't get why that film was so wildly overpraised. I think Cage has given better performances in a half a dozen other movies, but what are you going to do? The Academy at certain times fixates on certain movies, certain filmmakers, certain actors, and you say, but this person did better work here, here, here. How did Martin Scorsese win Best Director for The Departed? He's got at least 10 better movies than that, maybe 15. But that's the way it goes, right? That's Hollywood. And people have been arguing about the Oscars for the last 90 years, right? So Ransom sets up this self-made, to some extent, multi-millionaire airplane magnate, not M-A-G-N-E-T, but M-A-G-N-A-T-E. But this is a big hitter in the airline industry who was able to self-finance, we assume, and we can say he had to have caught a couple of breaks, but he went in at an angle of the business where things just took off. Just for perspective, we all know about the success of JetBlue, a kind of budget airline which caught on at the right time and made good, and whose ever idea it was, they're probably a billionaire, right? Or something like that. There was a different airline in the early 80s called People Express, which had the same idea, but it didn't catch on because it wasn't the right time. Timing is everything. And whatever it was that Tom Mullen did, some point, presumably the late 70s or early 1980s, he hit it exactly right at the right time and presumably caught a lot of breaks, maybe some ads that resonated with people, and he made it huge. So he's living the good life, but he's also still working his ass off. Like, this is not a guy sitting in the proverbial ivory tower, puffing on a cigar while everyone else works and he does nothing. No, he's still hustling. He is still out there. He's still promoting himself, promoting his business, and he's engaging in some shady shit along the way. So he's married to Rene Russo, and you hate to say it, but Rene, a couple of times in this decade, she did kind of play a bit of a trophy wife. She did it in the movie with Jim Belushi, Mr. Destiny, where she's the best thing about that movie for sure, but she kind of plays, she's a little bit of a trophy wife. Now, she has more shadings than just that, but that's kind of how it's presented. If you want to say that Mel's character, because he's going to be a billionaire someday, is a trophy husband, hey, equal opportunity here, right? We don't really give a shit. You can look at it that way too. She got with him because he was on the rise and he was going to make, $1 billion. So they have a son, played by Nick Nolte's real-life son, Brawley. And you can certainly see the resemblance. He was very young at the time. He's 10 or 11. And they live in Manhattan. I want to say they live on the Upper West Side, but I could be wrong about that. It could be the Upper East Side. Either way, maybe Central Park West. They're not living a normal, wealthy person, New York City lifestyle. They're living the Jerry Seinfeld, the Derek Jeter, the Randy Johnson when he was with the Yankees, where he had like a $40 million quad in the city. They're living that kind of life. So their son appears to be very intelligent, And he's at some kind of a science fair contest, not far from where they live. Like, they didn't travel, 200 miles and we don't know where we are and we get lost. No. But while they are at this contest, their son is taken in the manner of Liam Neeson. But unlike Liam Neeson, Mel Gibson has a particular set of skills, but not for this. He's not a guy who is trained to hunt down bad people, because at heart, he may have a heart of gold, but he may be worse than them. He may be more willing to spill blood than any kidnapper you've ever seen or heard of. Well, Mel Gibson in his film, while he is ruthless, he's ruthless from a business perspective. He's ruthless from a greaseball payoff. He's that. But he is not ruthless in a perspective of, I'm coming to get you. Because he's not trained for it. He's an airline industry guy. He's a business titan. This is not Dirty Harry. This isn't even Clint Eastwood's Secret Service agent Frank Corrigan. This is a really shady guy in one area of American industry. So he is kidnapped by what turns out to be a gang of kidnappers led by Gary Sinise's Jimmy Shaker, kind of an interesting name. And he's a New York City police officer, which gives him massive levels of advantage as far as trying to figure out who knows what are my fellow cops. It doesn't seem that anyone knows anything. And the reason why Mel Gibson's character is targeted by Gary Sinise's Jimmy Shaker and his kind of gang, one of which is Donnie Wahlberg, Mark Wahlberg's older brother, and also Lily Taylor, terrific actress, great performances that she gave in the decades. A very distinctive actress. She was in the movie The Addiction, maybe a year or two earlier. She's awesome. She was in The Haunting, not a good movie. Catherine Zeta-Jones, Owen Wilson. She's the only good thing in that film, if you ask me. Yeah, Liam Neeson was in that too. But they kidnap Tom Mullen's son, Sean, because they know that Tom Mullen, if pushed to a wall, he's a guy who's going to pay. He's going to give them the money they want because he has the money. And as a New York City police officer, he knows that this guy has made illegal payoffs and probably should already be in prison. So he'll do it again with the FBI, the NYPD, with everyone involved. He's going to do it again. He's a payer. Let's get this fucking guy. So they kidnap the kid. Mel and Renee, they freak out. She loses her shit. Mel's character of Tom Mullen loses his shit. And in the early scenes, he is very sympathetic. Even if we think, yeah, this guy is really a piece of shit. Doing this, doing that. This guy's in jail. And it's the more you learn about him, the more unsavory he is. And there were critics at the time who appreciated that Ron Howard was not showing a knight in shining armor type character, because there is a version of this movie, I hate to say it, if this film stars Tom Cruise, if this film stars Kevin Costner of that era, they're not doing any of that stuff. It's just a titan of business whose son is kidnapped. But Mel was interested in the fact that this guy is pretty fucking grimy. And Ron Howard, this is not the Ron Howard of Cocoon or even Apollo 13. This is the Ron Howard more of 5 years later with A Beautiful Mind, where you start saying, my God, are we really going here? Are we really getting in this deep? Yeah. Because he was evolving and he became interested in stories where there was more to chew on than just good guys and bad guys. There is, as Tom Cruise says in the movie Night and Day, sometimes it's good guys, bad guys, and worse guys. And Ransom explores the concept without phrasing it in the way of Tom Cruise in Night and Day of good guys, bad guys, and worse guys. And we can sit here and say, how bad is Mel Gibson's Tom Mullen relative to these miscreants who kidnapped his son? And in the manner of Clint Eastwood's High Plains Drifter, we root for Clint's character, the kind of man with no name, we never get the guy's name, because the other characters are so horrendous, we kind of don't have a choice. It's not quite as craven here, but there were critics who gave this film a lower rating because they said, I can't root for Mel's character, this guy's fucking horrible. What the fuck, man? I love this movie. And also, it's rare that a trailer for a film, whether it's today, whether it's 30 years ago, it's rare for a trailer to spin what you think the story is going to be on its head and leave the audience seeing the trailer for the first time in shock. Ransom does that because the story setup that I just gave you, we get this in broad strokes in the trailer. A guy who's probably going to be a billionaire someday, self-made airline titan, hard worker, beautiful wife, beautiful family. They are living large in Manhattan, the greatest city on earth. I don't give a shit what anybody says. I've been there. I spent a lot of time there. There's problems. New York City is still New York City, right? Anyway, we see this. We see Sean Mullen is kidnapped. The parents freaking out. Here comes Delroy Lindo with the FBI. And let's make a payment and let's get this kid back. But instead, we don't see exactly what happens in the trailer. But in the world of the movie, it goes into more detail. Something happens. There is a drop-off, or what's supposed to be a drop-off, where Mel, here's the money, whatever the amount of money is, and you tell me, or my son should be here, whatever it is, if they agree upon something. And Mel gets the idea, they were just going to kill me and take the money. So in the trailer, we see, and it was Fox 5, Rosanna Scotto, who was actually the anchor at the time. I always like when they use the real-life anchors to play themselves to kind of add to the verisimilitude, in the immortal words of Richard Donner, Mel Gibson's old buddy from the Lethal Weapon series, the filmmaker. We see an enormous amount of money just laid out on a table. And you have Mel Gibson's Tom Mullen looking like he's about to cry. He's somewhere between frothing at the mouth with rage and he's going to burst into tears at any second. He's sitting there and he says, to the people who took my son, here's the money that you're now asking for. This is your ransom. I want you to take a good look at it because this is the closest you're ever going to get to it. Because this money here, I am putting as a bounty on your head. Your move, more or less. Now, when that scene happened in the trailer, I'm telling you, watching it for the first time, I don't remember what movie I was seeing, but it was a couple of months. It was probably sometime in the summer of '96. It could have been Independence Day, I don't know, that we were seeing. You could have heard a pin drop. The audience gasped when we realized, holy shit, he's not going to play ball with these guys. He's saying, I want the worst people in the world to come out of the woodwork and kill you motherfuckers who took my son. You want to rough me up? You want to play hardball with me? Fuck you. You're all going to die. Someone else is going to get the ransom and I'm going to get my son back. So you give him back now and this stops. Again, Liam Neeson a dozen years later. It'll be the end of it. Just give her up. No more. I'm not going to chase you. There's not going to be any more static. You just give me back my daughter. If you don't, I'm going to find you. I'm going to kill you. It's just that simple. Well, this is that. Only Mel himself is not planning on trying to kill anybody because he's an airline industry type. He is not a super cop in the manner of Martin Riggs. Do the right thing, or God be with you, because no one else will. And that's basically the movie. It becomes a war of wills between Gary Sinise's very, very corrupt NYPD detective Jimmy Shaker and Mel Gibson's also very corrupt, but certainly a much better guy, Tom Mullen. And Delroy Lindo doesn't get to do as much here. The character I don't think is as interesting as what he did in Get Shorty. But he still has a certain gravitas and a certain sense of like a grounded reality that he brings to the role of the FBI. He's kind of the coordinator trying to figure out. He just wants Gibson to pay. And no matter how many different times we as the audience know, and Tom Mullen knows, and Delroy Lindo's FBI guy also knows, no matter how many times they attempt to do an actual payoff and try to set it up where there's no way they can fuck with us because they're not going to get the money unless your son is at this point. He is going to continue to recommend that they pay. And that's where he and Mel have this kind of fracture, because for stretches they're working together, and then all of a sudden Mel says, you can stay here, you can prosecute me for something else, but I am not doing it your way because my son is going to be returned, but he's going to be in a fucking box. We're doing this my way, and that's it. You can help, or you and the rest of the FBI can go fuck yourselves, go fuck yourselves. And it's the headstrong nature, as I say, that some critics objected to. This guy, why did they make his character be such a heel? I don't get it. But to me, it's fascinating. And it's like in the old days of the WWF in the 80s, every once in a while you would have two bad guy wrestlers going against each other, and the fans almost didn't know what to do. But audiences came out for this film. It was a big budget and marketing push. Ransom cost $80 million in total to produce and market. That's a pretty big risk for the studio almost 30 years ago. Or in fact, when it was funded, it would have been 30 years ago. This film made $309+ million worldwide. It didn't just succeed in the United States. It was the kind of big action movie with colorful characters and, of course, the great New York City locations. I hate to say it, the people in Europe love that kind of stuff. They love that, and as we know, they also line up around the block for Stallone. I mean, imagine Stallone in this film. Oh, that would have been great. He was not one of the people, but you could imagine Stallone playing, maybe you can't imagine Stallone playing a business mogul, but man, then his threats come across differently. Then he could have said, I'm coming to get you again. I'm coming to get you. Bro, you said this in a movie 10 years ago. Don't say it again. But Ransom is a film that, despite the fact it wouldn't seem to be a rewatchable type of a story, it is. This is a film that you can revisit. And Mel really gives a great performance. You know, the fact that with all of his issues outside of cinema, he's a great film actor. He can be funny, he can be serious. You know, nominated for, No, he wasn't even nominated for Best Actor for Braveheart. That was a bit of a surprise. But he gives a really tight, focused, committed performance. But it's a performance that fits the character. We believe this is how Tom Mullen would behave. He is not used to taking orders. He is, in his way, a maverick, a Martin Riggs type of a personality where I know the rules. Sometimes I'm going to follow the rules, but other times I'm just going to listen to myself. Listening to myself got me here. I think you and you don't know what you're talking about. You're just trying to glad hand me and get me to agree to what you're saying. We tried it your way. It didn't work. And that's that. So the movie also doesn't go where you expect. Obviously, you start the movie, you know that it's not going to be as simple as they take the kid and here's $2 million and here's your kid back and that's the film. You know that that's not going to be the movie. But the film still doesn't go as we expect. Another thing I appreciate, where you could have a kind of a young viewer, let's say a fan of action movies of today, who wants to, what's a really good action thriller from the 90s? This isn't the first movie that I would bring up, but this is certainly on the list. And a person seeing this for the first time, I guarantee they're not going to be able to predict anything that happens in the third act. It does not go at all the way we expect. Maybe in broad strokes, is this going to be a 70s thriller where the hero just gets beat and loses or dies? Maybe. But it takes risks. It takes chances. It goes down some really grimy and dirty pathways that I don't think audiences were expecting. And that's part of the reason why the film was such a big hit, the word of mouth. Most moviegoers told other people to see it. This was not ever going to get a sequel. This is an action movie that was always just going to be a one-off. And it's one of the most successful of that type. Again, $310 million almost 30 years ago. That is a crazy hit. No IP. Just a movie thrown out into the marketplace and the masses lapped it up. So it's at about 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, it was a success with critics, but I feel like there were a number, percentage-wise, a lot of critics, like the Newsday critic would have given it a thumbs down. He said there's incredible action, it's a great story, but Mel's character is so unlikable it ruined the movie. I mean, give me a break, get over yourself, bro. I don't know if that was John Anderson or Jack Matthews. It was one of those guys. And usually I love those critics. They were two of my favorites, and they just happened to write for the local newspaper. Well, it was New York Newsday, but I got the Long Island edition. But they gave the film a lower rating because they were, why is Mel's character so terrible? Come on. Don't you want shadings? Don't you want characters to not be paint by the numbers? I guess you don't. But you think about the great thrillers of the 70s, whether it's Clint in Dirty Harry, whether it's Gene Hackman in The French Connection, whether it's Dustin Hoffman in Marathon Man. Those are all gray area characters. And yes, Harry Callahan is a good guy, but don't fuck with him. That's a guy that you would want to try to take down a Jimmy Shaker. Well, the second Dirty Harry film, Magnum Force, has him going against 5 fellow cops, right? Marathon Man, the character that Dustin plays, Thomas Babington Levy, or Babe, he's a real asshole. But everyone else in the story is so much worse than him, he seems like Abraham Lincoln. He seems like the greatest guy ever, because everyone else is so bad. And then, Gene Hackman in The French Connection he's a real scumbag, Pop White Doyle's a real scumbag as presented, but he's also not a French drug kingpin. He's a lot better guy than that guy. Those films took risks, they succeeded, and I believe that Ransom takes similar kinds of risks, and because of the commitment and the energy and the drive and the rage that Mel Gibson in other films, but in this one also, the rage that he registers, we feel it. It's not just that he's alpha male and you better give me back my son. He wants his fucking kid back. You stole what didn't belong to you from me. You're going to end up all dying. You fucked with the wrong multi-millionaire. Let's fucking go. And ultimately, that's the movie Ransom. It is one of the best thrillers of its decade. It certainly continued to advance the career of its star, Mel Gibson. And Gary Sinise even back then joked around, why can't I ever get the girl? I always have to play the friend or the bad guy. Why can't I get the girl? No offense, Gary, not everybody gets to play the guy that gets the girl. That's just the way that it goes. But Ransom, a fantastic suspense thriller, action movie, released on this day, 1996, directed by Ron Howard, and starring Mel Gibson, Rene Russo, Delroy Lindo, Gary Sinise, Lily Taylor, and Donnie Wahlberg. This has been episode 638 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your early Sunday morning here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, give me back my son! Peace.